Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Huff, and I serve with Edie Copley as Intra-Sessions co-chair for this conference. This intra-session is entitled The Accompanist's Perspective and will be presented by Dr. Kurt Knecht. Any session handouts can be found on the intra-session page under Files. And during the session, you may type questions for Dr. Knecht in the chat feature, and I will be monitoring that, time permitting. And I think we will have time at the end of the session. He will answer selected questions near the end of our time together. So, without further ado, please enjoy the accompanist's perspective, Dr. Knecht.
Thanks so much, and thanks everybody for coming. Thanks for the introduction, and I also want to especially thank, I've had several friends over the past couple of years ask me to do this talk, and especially Beth Ritchie recently said, you should do this talk at National ACDA. So I want to thank her for encouraging me to do this. What I want to do today is talk a little bit in narrative form about some of the experiences that I've had playing for a lot of great conductors, talk about some of the insights that I've learned about choral conducting, and in specific, some of the things that have happened in the interaction between conductor and accompanist. And then at the end, we'll go into some more specifics with your questions. Okay, so to start off, I think it's interesting that the first really great conductor that I had the chance to play for was Andre Thomas. And believe it or not, when I did it, I was 16 years old. And Andre was conducting my county honor choir. I like to tease him about it when I see him now, because when's the last time you think Andre Thomas conducted a county honor choir? It was probably that county honor choir that I played for. And the first thing I noticed that was different from anybody that I had played for before was that technical issues with the ensemble and emotional issues were not two separate things. That is, there are some conductors, and I think it's a weaker practice to say, I've got to get the pitches down, I've got to get the rhythms down, I got to get the sound down. And then once I get all those technical things put together right, then I'm going to come back and add in the emotional content to make it special. Really great conductors don't separate those things out. Really great conductors find a way to address technical issues while keeping the choir emotionally engaged. They always figure out a way to have the choir sing with musical intention at the same time that they're working on the technical problem. This does several things to make rehearsal better, because when you're just doing technical stuff aside from any emotional content, it's boring. But secondly, when people are emotionally engaged, they breathe differently. They work harder at trying to fix things. I think they even listen better when they do that. So the first thing I really learned playing for him back then was that there is no technical issue that you have to address, that you need to do sort of in a dry fashion, but you can always figure out a way to address a technical issue while still maintaining emotional content and keeping the choir engaged. So I did my master's degree in Dallas, and I stopped playing for choir music for a while. And then I moved back to Florida. I'm from Tampa. And when I moved back to Tampa, Robert Summer hired me as a staff accompanist at the University of South Florida. Now, Robert's probably not as well known now as he was back then, but he founded the Master Chorale of Tampa Bay. And back then, it was one of the great symphonic choruses in the country. They're on Robert Shaw's last recording. So I was playing for all of the choir classes and various vocal and instrumental studios at the university. And most especially, I was playing for Bob's conducting classes. Now, the first thing I want to tell you about that I think is a curious part of my career that's a little bit different, I don't know if it is or not, but I've always had this thing where choirs start defending me, and I'm not sure what that's about, but at several points over my career, choir members have gone to conductors and said, hey, you need to stop being so rough on Kurt during rehearsal. And it first happened back then, and Bob came to talk to me about it, and I didn't know what he was talking about, and I couldn't figure out what he was trying to talk to me about. And then when I finally realized what he was talking about, that somebody had come to him and said, "You're yelling at Kurt too much," or something during rehearsal, I immediately said, I I never thought that you were doing anything except for trying to make the music sound better. I never was taking anything you did in rehearsal personally. And if I did think you were coming after me personally, I would come and talk to you and say, stop coming after me personally. The rule that I learned here is that you can be as intense as you want in rehearsal. You can be as intense as you want with your ensemble, with your accompanist, as long as everyone believes that you're doing it for the sake of the music and that it's not about you. Because when it's about the music and not about you, then you're an emotionally safe place and people will trust you and take risks for you. I don't know exactly what happens, but we've all probably experienced it before, that a conductor will say something or have some attitude. I wish I could give you a specific example, but you get this sneaking suspicion that this is about them, about their ego, about their career. And when that happens, then I'm a professional. I'm still going to come in and play the right notes for you, but I'm not going to entrust myself to you anymore emotionally. I'm not going to take a risk for you. So it's important that people trust you and that you are a safe place for them to take an emotional risk. Now, the trick about this is if you are that kind of conductor that is communicating that this is about your ego and about your own personal career, you're probably going to be the last one to know it. And the only way to fix it is probably with therapy or some close friends that are going to be pretty honest with you. But it's good to be aware of and to be at least thinking about the question of, am I creating a space where people are going to be willing to take a risk for me? And if you are that kind of space, then I'm saying I as the accompanist, I never take any bit of intensity, any quote unquote yelling, very personally ever, because if you didn't know it, I'll let you know now. The age of the sort of Toscanini asshole conductor is over, and you can't behave like that with people anymore. And the last time somebody tried to do it with me and yell at me, I made them cry in front of everybody. So be a safe space emotionally so that people will take risks. Now, one of the features of playing for Bob's conducting class in specific was that he had these mantras that he repeated all the time. And at the time, it sort of drove me a little bit crazy because he would repeat these things so constantly. And I would think, why is he constantly repeating these same things over and over to these young conductors? And then I got out and saw people doing different things and realized, oh, that's why Bob was repeating this so much. I'm going to give you two of his little gems that I think is really good practice for every choral conductor. Number one, when you feel things, where do you feel things? We feel things here. We communicate through this. When I get sad, I don't get sad in my little finger. I get sad here. So keeping the gesture that you're making in some way so that the focus of the ensemble is on the part of your body that feels things and that communicates things is um, vitally important. I can't emphasize enough how much this means to me as an accompanist, that if you are doing a gesture in such a way that I'm connected to the center of your body, it communicates so much more than this. I don't know if I'm in the camera. I think I mostly am. But once you get out here and you're conducting away from here, then all this communicates to me is that you're beating time and that you're keeping a clock. And believe it or not, I don't need that from you. I can keep time all by myself. Okay, I'm going to come back to some of these issues later, but keeping the gesture in a place that it stays so that the center of your body stays in communication with the entire ensemble. Super important. Second thing, one of the things that Bob said all the time that I think I wish more choir directors did. Bob always said, say one thing and fix it. I can't tell you how many times in a rehearsal a conductor will stop the ensemble and then list off a laundry list of things to practice. Now, I believe that there's some room for work here, especially when you get to more professional ensembles, there's some more room, but it's really good practice to just say one thing and fix it. If you stop the ensemble and say 3 things, they will probably forget the first 2 things that you say. So it's best if you say one thing and then fix it. You know, the second part of this, and I see this from young conductors a lot, is they think it's enough to sort of hear the ensemble, hear something that they want to fix, and then say it. And so let's say they stop the ensemble, they say their one thing, and then they let the ensemble, and then they try again. But then they don't actually fix it. This happens so many times during rehearsal. So you need to actually say one thing and then actually fix it. And if it doesn't get fixed, then you have to figure out, how do I need to fix it? Why is it not being fixed? Is it because of some way that I'm gesturing that it's not fixed, that they're responding to? Is it some technical resource that the ensemble needs to be able to fix the problem? But saying one thing and fixing it, I think, is the best practice. And laundry listing things doesn't work as well. And I really personally believe that that practice works best even when you're dealing with professional ensembles, is to just do the one thing. Okay, so I'm playing at USF at the time, and it was such a great time to be playing because I was playing for so many people that were just masterful technicians at the choir. I had started playing for Mike Scheibe by this time. I did concerts with Dorian Rao, Jerry McCoy, James Bass, that just won the Grammy this year, was a student back then, so I was playing for him. All of these people are just masterful technicians. And in the middle of all of that, I got a chance to do a weekend festival with Eve Ely. And the first time I was playing for Eve Ely, I didn't know what to think because I thought it was like playing for the Tasmanian devil. He was snorting and snarling and doing all of the stuff that Eve Ely does. And I just didn't know what to think. Now, the last year that I was actually teaching at university, Eve's office was right around the corner from me. So I got to spend a lot of time with him and get to know him a little bit. And I still see Eve around town because he comes to concerts here in Kansas City a lot. The amazing thing to me about playing for Eve was that in the entire weekend festival that we were playing together, he never once addressed a technical issue. I'm not suggesting this is the practice for everyone to do. I just want you to consider this. All Eve did was inspire that choir to sing. And to my amazement, without ever addressing a technical issue, the choir got better technically. They got better technically because when he was inspiring them, they were breathing differently. They were working harder to coalesce as an ensemble. They were working harder to listen together. And the thing that I learned from this is that you don't always have to fix a technical problem with a technical solution. You have to be careful in this because not everybody's Eve Ely and not everyone's going to be inspiring in that same way. You have to work within the context of your personality. But in this case, choirs can improve technically just by being inspired. So you can experiment with your own ensemble sometimes by not always trying to fix every technical problem with a technical solution, but sometimes with an emotional solution instead. Okay, I want to backtrack a little bit and talk about what it was like to play for Joe Michael Scheibe. And Mike means a lot to me personally because he was the first conductor that took a risk on me as a composer and started promoting my compositions and things like that. I was playing for Mike when he was conducting the Master Chorale of Tampa Bay. And I was just a kid back then. I was probably 22, 23 years old, something like that. And I went in to play one of those first rehearsals, and I swear, I don't know, I'm probably exaggerating or something, but I swear at the time, the gesture, I, he was doing something like this. I didn't know what it was. So I did what I always did back at that time. I just sort of covered my eyes and looked down at the piano and said, I'm just going to play and hope this all lines up because I have no idea what this means and what he's doing. The reason I bring that up is because there's a school of thought in choral conducting that what you see is what you get. And I want to be a little careful here because I might be controversial in my opinion about this, but I think that the emphasis on the gesture is a little bit overrated because of this. I've played for a lot of great conductors, and a lot of great conductors have unconventional gestures. I've also, and probably everybody that's listening to this talk has played or sung for a conductor who has a beautiful gesture and is a bad conductor because they have bad rehearsal technique and no musical ideas. So the emphasis on the perfect gesture, I think, is overrated. Really great conductors figure out a way to move their body in such a way that it communicates something to the group and enables them to participate in the musical activity that's going on. And it doesn't look the same in every body. So gesture is a thing. It would be impossible for me to tell you everything that I learned from Mike Scheibe about choir directing. So I picked one instead of all the many things that I learned. The greatest gift that Mike Scheibe gave to me was teaching me how to listen. And I think this is so important, especially in the age that we live in right now, especially when you're dealing, those of you that deal with young people who live so much of their lives worrying about how many likes they get on their social posts and things like that. And they wind up determining their self-worth by how many likes they might get on a post on social media. To give the gift of listening to somebody is one of the most profound and important gifts that you can give to anyone, because actually deeply listening to somebody says to them, what you're doing is important. What you're doing matters. What we're doing as an ensemble matters. Let me get specific about this and what I learned from Mike, because when I started playing for Mike, how I realized that I wasn't listening. At the time, the master chorale, I don't remember how big it was, but between 120 or 150 grown-up singers. So it was a large ensemble in a large room. And I would be playing, and Mike would go, there is an alto on the third row that's shaping the vowel a little bit differently than the rest of the altos. And then we would go back and he would give them a little tool to use to shape the vowel, right? And I would hear a difference in the alto sound because he had fixed that. Or sometimes he would be listening and he would go, the tenors on the fourth row, I need the tenor in the second chair and the seventh chair to switch places. And then we would go back and listen to it, and the tenor sound would have unified. So he was working that hard to listen to the ensemble that he was going down to picking out individual voices and giving them tools to be able to unify their sound. And when I heard that, I thought, I've never tried to work that hard to listen to a group. And also, rehearsal would begin with him giving us a list of notes from things that he had missed in the last rehearsal, because he was recording the rehearsals and going back and listening to them afterwards to find things that he was missing. And when I saw that depth of care placed into the rehearsal process to listening, I thought, I'm not doing this much. And look how much it empowers the ensemble to say, we can only accomplish what we're going to accomplish as a group if every single person is doing their part. And that matters to me, and you matter. And I'm going to show that that matters by working as hard as I can to listen and care about what you do. It's a great gift that you can give to your ensemble, not only for good musical results, but good life lessons to care about people in that way. That's what I learned from Mike, and I couldn't tell you all of the things that I learned from him. So we're going to move on because I want to save time for questions. And before I do that, I have to talk about my last 5 years or so that I've been playing for Charles Bruffy. Charles is also one that's a little bit harder for me to talk about because um, Charles and I are extremely close friends. As in, my wife and I eat dinner with Charles at least once a week during the regular year, and in the summer, it's often more like 3 or 4 times a week. And I help him take care of his horses on his farms. It's a very good conductor accompanist relationship. When I started playing for KC Chorale, I had the same experience again of choir members starting to defend me. So that this last album that the chorale put out, we put out with Stephen Fox's Clarion Choir from New York and Benedict Sheehan's group from St. Tikhon's. And the Kostelski Requiem, before they recorded it with Leonard Slatkin, those ensembles came down with us at KC Chorale, and we did a soft premiere at the National World War I Museum with me playing the piano. And when the ensembles came down to rehearse with us for the first time, Charles introduced me, and I'll try to get the introduction right. He said, especially those of you that are guests, this is Kurt. I need to tell you before we start the rehearsal that he's one of my best friends in the world. And so you don't have to worry about it if we get into a discussion in rehearsal, because what sometimes happens is that I tell Kurt the way the music is supposed to go, and then he tells me the way he thinks the music is supposed to go. And then I take that into consideration, and then I tell him the way the music is supposed to go, and he does what I say. The reason I tell that story is because one of the reasons that Charles and I work together well is because we love each other and we trust each other. And sometimes that relationship between conductor and accompanist doesn't work because you don't trust each other enough. Sometimes it can happen too if you're scared of each other, that it doesn't work. I've experienced both of those things, or seen both of those things where, you know, especially when I was younger, if I was too afraid of somebody, I wasn't bringing my full self. And more often not now, I experience where a conductor is afraid of me. And so that doesn't work because they're afraid to work. I think this is very important because you don't have to be, if you're the conductor, you don't necessarily have to be the best musician in the room. if I'm playing for you, you probably aren't the best musician in the room. That's not always the case, but if I'm playing for you, you probably aren't the best musician in the room. Because it turns out that I don't need you to help me keep time. I'm perfectly capable of keeping time on myself. I don't even need you to help me that much keep in sync with the ensemble, because I know how to do that too. I need you to keep me emotionally accountable. This is one of the reasons I still play for Charles, and I have more to learn from him, because one of the things that I'm not allowed to do when I play for Charles is to just come in and play the notes. I have to be taking risks all the time. I have to be emotionally vulnerable all the time. And that's what I really need help from you as a conductor, because after doing whatever else I've been doing all day, if I come into a rehearsal and I just want to play the notes and not think about it, that's not bringing my full self. And Charles doesn't allow me to do that. He's constantly challenging me to be emotionally vulnerable and to make everything beautiful. When I was young and taking lessons, one of the things that my teachers often made me do was they would say to me, Kurt, everything can't be beautiful. You got to pick one or two things to be beautiful. Everything can't be beautiful, because what you're doing is you're going down the path and you're smelling every flower, and we're losing the long line. So you have to pick one or two things to make beautiful, but not everything can be beautiful. And with Charles, I'm learning more and more that everything can be beautiful. And when I'm playing now, that's what I'm constantly doing. I'm thinking, am I doing this in the most beautiful way that I can do it? Am I doing it in the most vulnerable way that I can do it? Am I risking something of myself? Now, when I started for playing for Charles, I think the first gesture, when I sat down at the piano and he gave me one of those Charles Bruffy gestures, that was like, you know, his hand was doing something like this. And you got to remember, I'm not like a kid, like when I was playing for Mike Scheibe, and I would just look down and not pay attention to what they were doing. Charles got up in front of me and did something like this. And I just looked up from the piano and said, what is that supposed to be? I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. And he looked down at me and said, make the music go the way it's supposed to go. And if you require further instruction, then I will step in and provide it. Now, that's kind of funny, isn't it? But when you think about it, that's the kind of boss that you really want to work for. That's the kind of conducting that allows me as an individual artist to have some space to offer my thing and allow you have the space to work. And then when you require further instruction to coordinate with the ensemble, or if you aren't really bringing it, you need somebody to hold you accountable. That's what you really need from somebody. And as conductors, I think your main job is to hold people emotionally accountable so that they're not just marking time when they come in. And speaking of those risks, I will talk specifically about playing for KC Chorale, because I think what we do is a little bit different than a lot of ensembles, in that most ensembles rehearse a thing the way it should go, or the way they think it should go, and they practice it and practice it. And then when they get into the performance situation, they perform it the way that they rehearsed it as best they can. I don't think that that's what we do in KC Chorale. I think that in rehearsal, what we're actually doing is rehearsing our own sensitivity to the gesture itself. Because with Charles, that sense of accountability goes all the way into the concert itself, where he asks us to take risks in front of an audience, which means it's going to be very spontaneous music making. And sometimes it's not going to be the same as we rehearsed it because it might feel different on that day. A lot of people don't like to do this because, I mean, for me at least, it's much more akin to when I play with a jazz trio or something like that, because you're making everything up on the spot. A lot of people don't like it because if you're going to take risks on the stage in front of an audience, sometimes things can go terribly wrong. And some people don't like to take that risk. But when it goes right and you're in this spontaneous music making, it's the most wonderful thing in the world. I'll also say this because it's a little unnerving when it happened the first time, but you get used to it to a certain degree. That thing about being intense, and I said, you have to make sure people are convinced that it's not about you. One of the things that Charles does is sometimes when we're in mid-concert, he'll look at us and say, I don't feel like conducting this piece, I just want to listen, and he'll walk off the stage and go sit down. And so then we just go. But think about what a beautiful gesture that is that you might want to try, and what trust you must have in your musicians and your ensemble and in even the rehearsal process, that you could just sit down and let them go on their own to show that this is not just all about you and your ego. I think it's another amazing gift, and tying back into Mike Scheibe, think about what that says to your ensemble. I don't feel like conducting this one. I just want to listen. I just want to enjoy you. Um, we can go in a lot of different directions from here, but I do like interaction and questions a lot. Different conductors do things different. So for example, with KC Chorale, Doreen Rao was the same way. Charles doesn't let me give pitches. Doreen didn't ever let me give pitches for the choir because they both said it makes the choir singers lazy and they can remember pitches on their own. And if you're constantly spoon feeding them, so there's a lot of weird quirks and that sort of thing. But I'd really rather at this point, so that we have time to get into some more specifics, just open it up for questions and try to address some specific concerns you have or anything else.
Great. Kurt, I've got some questions that have come in. The first question is from Carol Manifold. She asks, what advice do you have for pianists with no accompanist experience when they first start to work with a choir? Go back to the very beginning.
Okay, it's interesting that's a tough question. I mean, there are two parts to this. One, I mean, if you're going to be serious about being an accompanist, you need to be practicing those skills that you need. So you need to practice your score reading, get that awful red book by R.O. Morris that strikes fear into the heart of every musician. If you don't know which one I'm doing, is called I think it's called Preparatory Exercises in Score Reading. Do you know, Michael? Do you know what I'm talking about? It's the one in all the clefs. It's where you have to read 4-part in like soprano, alto, tenor, and bass clef. And once
Nightmares,
you,
right?
yeah, that's right. And once you start doing that, well, you'll find that just reading SATB open score is doing it. So you obviously have to do practical things. You have to work on your chops. But if you're working with a specific accompanist that's having problems, there's a place where I think that if you're going to be really good at your job, that you have to take being with the conductor more seriously than anything else that's happening. And this is a hard place because given the limits of your technical ability, I don't know. I'm saying this. Early on in my life, I decided I'm going to be the guy that stays with the conductor even if I play a wrong note. I'll play a wrong note, but I'm going to be with the conductor. Now, fortunately, I've got enough chops that I don't play that many wrong notes, but that's the first thing. You have to get good at score reading. You have to get good at listening, and you have to get, I mean, the real trick is, especially if you're going to play for people, you wind up playing for a lot of different people, you have to learn how to get inside any specific conductor's gesture and learn how to help them out. Now, as you're going on further and you get better, you can, you know, what I'm always doing is if the tenors are having trouble with their line, I'm bringing out that line a little bit. I'm doing that sort of thing. But you have to, you have to decide that you're going to be with the conductor before anything else. And the other thing that I think helped me a lot, I was playing when I was coming up for so many vocal studios and instrumental studios that I just started developing real sensitivity to breath. Everything always comes back to breath, you know, and so if you are just trying to stay with a metronome, if you think that's what you're doing, that's not the right thing. You need to be listening and being sensitive to the breath of everyone so that you can line up, with them.
Wonderful advice. Thank you. Another question from Jana Bassett. She says, is there a particular conducting style that you find easier to follow or stay connected with?
The clear kind, but do you know what I mean? The clear kind, but that's a great question, actually. It is a great question, but the answer is not what, this is what I was trying to communicate before. I think a lot of times we think that the answer to that is in the physical gesture itself, and that what we have to do to become more clear is to somehow beat time in a more clear way. And it's not what I need. And I think if I'm typical, it's not what most ensembles need. I need to know what you're trying to do musically. I have to find out what your emotional intention, if you don't like emotional intention, say what your musical intention is. I'm trying to learn how you want the phrase shaped. And once I know how you're trying to shape the phrase, then I can be with you musically and in time and emotionally and all in those ways that we want to connect. I find that it has less to do with the actual physical form of the gesture, because that looks different in different bodies. And I've just been in too many situations where someone had a really clear gesture and the ensemble still didn't manage to be together. So I don't think it's in the physical gesture. I think it's in the ability to communicate the shape of the phrase and the emotional intention that you're after.
Great, great. Thank you. Ellie Barth asks, do you have any advice for a college piano student looking to start a career as an accompanist?
Yes, sure. I'm full of
Run!
advice.
No, I was kidding.
I will actually, I don't usually like to give advice to people, but aside from the fact that you need to practice a lot, I still practice a lot, I think. So you got to practice a lot, a lot. I mean, you know, now when I was a college student doing that, I mean, I was in the practice room from, you know, ninth grade through undergrad. I was in the practice room 3 to 5 hours every day, every day, every day, all the time. And I still, there's a lot of days where I still manage 3 hours a day. So you got to practice a lot to get chops. But I would say if you're serious about like going the accompanist route, which is a pretty satisfying life, quite honestly, to live, the main advice I would give to you is learn to play organ and learn to play harpsichord, because one of the reasons that I've always worked is because I switch back and forth between, or theoretically, organ is my primary instrument, though I don't know, because I started off my life as a pianist and I've always kept up my piano chops. And, you know, I love playing harpsichord continuo. So if you're really serious about it, I think the two things that I would say primarily are learn to play the organ, because it's one of the ways that can make you more available. And I would also highly recommend learning to play jazz piano, because it just helps with a lot of things. It helps with a lot of things, helps with your continual playing when you're expected to improvise. It's fun, and it again, sometimes there are certain contexts in which a group that you're playing for will need to do music of a pop style, and rather than having them go out and hire somebody else. So that's the two big things: organ and jazz piano. Yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant. I'm looking at more questions coming up. It's starting to really bounce. Uh, let's see. Here's a little love from Mike Scheibe. He says, great collaborative artists are extremely difficult to find. and the pianist is so key, and I couldn't agree with that more. Bravo, Dr. Scheibe. Jason Snyder asks, have you witnessed a conductor holding an ensemble emotionally accountable? It sounds like you have, but it sounds like Jason would like you to expand on that idea a little bit.
Mm, yeah. So let's talk about what it looks like when somebody doesn't do that, because that
Okay,
might set it in
let me
relief a
finish.
little bit more.
Let me finish
Oh,
with
go
the
ahead.
picture.
Yeah.
I love this idea, but would love to have an example or two of what it looks like, especially between conductor and accompanist.
That's probably easiest to talk about with me and Charles working together, because what Charles will, is constantly saying is, when I start something, it, the reason I'm struggling to talk about it is because you have to understand that, number one, music is invisible, so it's hard to talk about anyway. And a lot of times what happens in a relationship, a musical relationship that we're talking about, doesn't happen through words. It happens through just gestures. So a lot of what I'm doing is trying to articulate and put into words what is happening. So, what will happen sometimes is when I'm doing a phrase, I will play it and I'm not stretching and pulling enough in a place. So Charles will give me some gesture to show me, you're going too fast. That's what he's always telling me. You're going too fast. Take time to make this beautiful. And so then I'll go, oh, wait, I was just playing the notes for a minute. I wasn't doing everything that I needed to do. So I need to get into a place where I'm going to take a little risk. And then sometimes the opposite thing will happen too. Meaning that sometimes when he gives me a little bit of latitude, I will take some space for my own personal expression that will be a little bit too selfish for what the entire ensemble is trying to accomplish, if that makes sense. And then he'll just probably say something to me like, using a Charles phrase, it says, it sounded like in this measure you were trying to be talented. Don't be talented there, or whatever like that. That's kind of our language of talking about stuff like that. So there's certain times in that where I'm not giving enough of myself, and he can communicate with gesture normally, and that's enough to do, because he's very communicative that way. Sometimes he'll just say, "You're going too fast. You have to do. Why are you doing? But yeah. And if I'm being a little selfish, he'll do me my favorite. He doesn't do this gesture, but the gesture that you have to use with me most often is this. Cast it out, reel it in, Kurt, reel it in.
Indeed. Peter says, my teacher always said the best accompanist is a mind reader. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think I know what that means, and I think that there has to be something of that. In the best relationships, I think you do have to, in some ways, get used to a person and anticipate what they're going after so that you can work really well together. So yes, I've had lots of experiences like that where it does help. And the other thing that you can do when it's a good relationship, I think the best way that you this is a different aspect of that same problem. Uh, what I do to student conductors that I think is my greatest gift is I actually follow their conducting. And that's the thing that it's kind of cruel at times. And I've actually been in a musical situation. I was in a musical, I got fired from that job. But one time the band punished a conductor by following her conducting. It is one of the greatest gifts you can give to a student conductor. And a lot of times I will find, like, when somebody is conducting, a younger conductor is playing with me for the first time, they will say to me, "Oh, this is really weird. I've never had anybody that's actually following and responding to my gesture before," and that's a new experience, and they can actually learn learn a lot from actually doing it. But yeah, there's some mind reading. If that's the right way to say it, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it maybe implies a sort of musical artistic intimacy that exists between the podium and the piano.
You do, and you know, in any. So I played in a. I played for a while with a friend in an improvisation ensemble, organ and viola, where we would go out and literally, I mean, we had the roughest outlines of what we were going to do, but we would do a whole 60-minute concert of just music that we were making up. And when you get into that sort of improvisation relationship, what inevitably happens when you're taking those kind of risks over the course of an hour is, well, somebody can get lost, you can be having a bad day, something can happen. And after you play together for a while, you start to learn how to, if somebody's starting to get a little squirrely over here, you become more steady and clear so that they have a place to fall back on. And you learn how to trust each other so that if one or the other of you is getting a little fuzzy, that you make a safer space so that there's more room for that. I don't know if that's being very articulate. That's pretty abstract talking,
No,
but I
but
think that that's what actually happens between good accompanists and conductors
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah, I agree, and that happens when playing jazz too. I've experienced that myself. Timothy.
Right.
Timothy Banks asks an interesting question, and maybe something that we can all kind of laugh about. But it's a great question, I think. Do you ever feel that the choir is following you, the accompanist, instead of the conductor?
Oh man, you should have seen me when I was a kid because I was so arrogant. You know, because whenever you're like you have chops and stuff and you think yourself, I swear to you, I would if anybody ever did this to me when I was conducting, I would smack them. When I was I think I was 16 or 17 playing in high school, and my choir director gave a downbeat and I wasn't paying attention because I was talking to some girl or whatever across the piano. And I looked up at her from the piano because I realized what had happened. I didn't start the piece. And I said, I just wanted to let you know who's really in charge here. Um,
Ooh.
I would kill somebody if they did that. And I'm not that kind of person here. Yes, it can definitely, let me say it this way. Sometimes what happens, depending on the conductor and the situation, is that the accompanist is actually serving as the principal translator of the gesture, and the choir, if they are insecure about the gesture, will go with what they hear.
Not unlike a
Um,
concert master, kind of leading an orchestra with
Sometimes it
another
works,
instrument. That happens.
sometimes it does work like that if the ensemble gets insecure or the gesture is unclear some way,
Sure.
because you have to sort of serve as a translator. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of orchestras, Robert Prowse asks, when you are playing an orchestral reduction, do you spend time with the full score or listen to recordings to feel more like an orchestra?
I don't, you're going to get me on some of my controversial
Here we go.
topics, but I don't. I mean, yes, I love orchestral music and spend a lot of time with full scores, but I don't believe that pianos, I don't believe in, you're going to get me in trouble here, Michael. I don't believe in touch. I don't believe in tone quality on piano. I don't believe in any of that stuff. I don't believe that pianists can affect their sound by the way they play the piano and touch. So I don't try to pretend that I'm playing a different instrument than the piano. I just, I don't, when I'm playing an orchestral reduction, I'm thinking about what kind of notes am I going to leave out most of the time. And, you know, occasionally it's helpful. Like when we were doing those Kostalski requiems, it was a dreadful reduction made by somebody who didn't know what they were doing. And so I had to, you know, Ben Sheehan came over and said, hey, look at this whole section. This is all trumpets and trombones and stuff, and it's not written in your part, so we just need you to improvise and make a big sound or whatever like that. So sometimes I think in terms of making a bigger sound or filling out a chord or something like that, but
Yeah, yeah.
I don't, my mind doesn't work that way. I mean, I write orchestral music, but I don't think that way when I'm accompanying.
maybe articulation and texture. I've got time for one last question. Uh, and this is an interesting one. It comes from Sean. Any ideas on how we can improve standards of monetary compensation for accompanists?
Well, hmm.
I mean,
mm,
some towns have union scale and that sort of thing that some musicians are able to live under. Any ideas on maybe connecting to something like that?
I don't have a lot of ideas on that. Do I think it should happen? Yeah, a lot of times, because some of the things that we're asked to do sometimes as accompanists is bananas. It's bananas. You know what I mean? Like, I will tell you a a few weeks ago, I played an event where I knew that I was going to have to show up and play a hymn and Malat Our Father, but I didn't know what the hymn was, and I didn't know the keys of either thing. And and also I was only going to have 10 minutes to work with the singer to find out what key they wanted it in and what key and what the hymn was and what key they wanted that in. And you had 10 minutes and you just decided to go. And I thought after that, even in a big city like Kansas City, I don't know how many people could actually show up and do that. And I should probably get more than the couple $100 that they're giving me for that.
Haven't
But
we
it's
all had
also
moments like that where we thought, "Hey, I'm not getting paid enough for this"?
That's right. It happens at times, or it's tough, and some of the other things that accompanists just learn how to do. Like I remember auditioning for somebody one time, and they were trying to check out if I could read open score, so they gave me an 8-part open score, and I read down the page, and then I played it in like the half, like a half step above, and then a half step above that. While I did the reduction, I think, man, we learn all these skills our whole life, and the guys that are waving there and the girls that are waving their arms are getting all the money from this. We're having to work on all of these skills, but yeah, you do have to sometimes fight for yourself a little bit and say, hey, I'm doing this, but this comes under the broader scope, the broader rubric of musicians in general need to be paid more money. So there's a lot, right?
Here,
You
here.
know what I mean?
Here, here, and on that optimistic note, we're going to have to bring this to a close. I want to thank you for this brilliant talk and for sharing all this information with us, Kurt. It's been a real pleasure, folks. This session was recorded and will be available on demand through December. So if you want to come back, if other folks that maybe weren't able to be with us want to come back and see that, it'll be on until December. We encourage you to visit the exhibits, which are open throughout the day. And next up on the schedule is a concert session, which is slated to start at 6:15 Central Daylight Time. Keep consulting the master schedule and keep enjoying this wonderful conference. We're so glad to be together, even if we're getting together from our offices. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. Enjoy the rest of the conference.